Well, welcome everyone. This is Jack Zemlicka, Managing Editor of Precision Farming Dealer, and welcome today to our latest webinar. Today's event is brought to you and other pre-registrants free, courtesy of the Western Equipment Dealers Association. And our presenter today is Lance Formwalt, who leads the Equipment Dealer Practice Group at Siegfried Bingham in Kansas City, and serves as legal counsel for individual farm equipment dealerships and several North American dealer associations. Lance assists dealers and associations with a variety of matters, including implementation and execution of privacy policies and related agreements that assist dealers in reducing risk involved with handling of precision data, as well as other customer information. In today's live webinar event, Lance is going to share tips and tactics that you dealers can utilize to protect yourselves and customers from precision data disasters, along with what to look for in the future. So before we turn the controls over to Lance, I have just a couple of housekeeping items. On your screen, there's an arrow you can click on that will open up a question field and allow you to submit questions at any time during the presentation. Time permitting, we'll look to answer as many of those submissions as possible following the presentation. And if we don't get to all of the questions, we'll make sure we send them along to Lance and then post the answers on our website, along with the archived video replay of the webinar, so you can go back and review it again if you'd like. Also, if for any reason your internet connection or even our connection should happen to fail at some point and it looks like the webinar has been interrupted, just make sure to go back to the email you received earlier telling you how to join the webinar, and then you can re-enter the program that way. With that, I believe we're ready to roll. Thanks again for joining us today. We will now turn over the controls to Lance Formwalt to begin his webinar presentation. Hey there, Lance.
Hey, Jack. Thanks a lot. Good morning, everyone. As Jack mentioned, my name is Lance Formwalt. I'm with the Siegfried Bingham firm in Kansas City. And over the course of the past 40 years, I've only been here for about 15 years or so of those. We've spent a lot of time working with equipment dealers and dealer associations. And as part of that work we do, we've had the opportunity to get in on the front end on a variety of issues that impact you all in your business. And one of those issues is the topic for today's presentation, and that relates to data and the privacy implications that go along with that in your relationships with your customers. And so, this is an issue that's really been percolating for the last couple years or so, and really started when John Deere came out to its dealers and said, hey, we need you to adopt a privacy and data management policy. And as a result of that, that led to some questions that came into the Western Equipment Dealers Association, which is located in Kansas City as well. And the questions from the dealers in that area were along the lines of, what exactly does this mean? Why do I need to be paying attention to this? Do I have to do this? And finally, how can you help me? And so after getting some of those questions, we had some further conversations and said, hey, this is probably an important issue that we need to start paying attention to, and maybe we can get out ahead of this for the benefit of our members and start thinking about what we can provide that might be helpful in this area. And so as a next step, what we did is we put together a meeting with some John Deere executives to talk to them about their viewpoints in this area, what they were looking for from dealers, what they were concerned about, and their expectations. Their thought was, if we're gonna do some work for dealers in this area, let's make sure we find out what's important to John Deere, and then try to go forward and develop something that would work for that as well as benefit dealers. At the same time, then we actually also put together a meeting with a group of 7 or 8 John Deere dealers in kind of around the Kansas City area. Spent the day with them, which was representing owners and some of their precision ag specialists. Again, meeting with them to really understand what were their interactions on a day-to-day basis with customers and the customers' data, their interactions with the manufacturers, what kinds of products and services were they selling that related to data. And all of that was designed to try to get a really good understanding of what we were working with, what we needed to accomplish, and try to develop some products that would be really beneficial to dealers in your particular business and not just dealing with just broad-based issues of consumer privacy that impacts everybody and all retailers. And so as a result of that process, we put together a set of materials, some explanations and documents that we think covers about probably about 95% of what you guys need to really be thinking about in terms of data and your customer relationships in your business today. And as part of that process, what we really determined was that this issue is colorblind. This is not just a John Deere issue. It doesn't matter if you're selling green, blue, orange, yellow, or red. You've got to be thinking about this issue of data and privacy. And so to that end, we also, after we had done some of the initial work in response to the inquiries from Deere dealers, we met with dealers representing AGCO, Kubota, Case, and New Holland, and did the same exercise. Met with them for a day, again, trying to understand whether or not they were experiencing the same things that we had seen from Deere dealers. And by and large, the answer to that was yes. And so, we think that the documents and the materials that we produced are really relevant for all dealers, no matter what the brand. And as a result of that, we've got this package available for dealers. And what I want to do today is, over the course of the next 45 minutes or so, is take you through a presentation that really addresses a couple things. The first would be to try to give you an overview of some of the key issues that are involved in this area. And then hopefully walk you through in fairly straightforward terms, walk you through the different materials that we produce, and try to hopefully explain to you pretty easily why these things are important and what they mean to you and how you can use them. And so with that, we'll go ahead and get started with the presentation. And from an overview standpoint, in terms of why are we here today? I mean, the reality is, the stuff that you're selling to your customers is changing. And over the last, course of the last 10 or 15 years, the amount of technology that's associated with the equipment that you're selling has grown tremendously. In theory, it seems to have, the idea is that it's to generate better efficiencies for your customers, hopefully give them additional data that they can use to make better decisions in their business. I think by and large it's been successful at doing that. The customers have been adopting the technology and have been continuing to buy new equipment and services. And so that has worked well. However, at the same time, customers have also started to realize that there are some downsides to having all of this data available to them and available to others. And this has partly been informed by their experiences as just general consumers. Everything that you guys see in the news today relating to whether it goes back to the Target and Home Depot credit card breaches. There seems to be a restaurant company every other week that announces they've had some kind of a data breach. The largest health insurer in the country had issues with loss of data, and so consumers, including your customers, are seeing this really almost seemingly on a day-to-day basis, where someone is experiencing a loss of their information, and that's created some concern among your customers about the data that's out there that's being generated from this technology. And so when we have that, we're not going to go back to the day where we don't have the technology. That's not going to happen. But instead, we've got a tension now between the good and the real positive aspects of this, and then some of the negative things that can come from having this data that may be available or used for purposes for which it wasn't intended. And so when that happens, you've got a recipe for getting the lawyers involved and the legislature involved. And so one of the things that we're experiencing is changing rapidly is a change in the legal relationships with you and your customers and your manufacturers. That's part of what we're going to talk about today. And also, this is not something that, kind of the aspect of this that relates to the consumers at large. I mean, that is definitely out there as informing your customers. But this is an area where you've got various people in your industry that are also paying close attention to this. And so on the screen, you see there's a website there for a Growers Information Services Cooperative, which is a cooperative that's formed in West Texas probably a couple of years ago. And the idea was, for this is a group of producers that formed this, and the thought was, look, we want to make sure if we're going to have this data that's available to us, and if people might find this useful, we want to make sure that we're storing it in a secure way. and that if someone does want to use this data of ours, then we want to make sure that we can get compensated for that as a way to kind of monetize our, the data that's being produced from our businesses. And so this group is not necessarily going to be limited to West Texas, but it's a group that is obviously expressing some concern in this area and wants to take steps to deal with some of their issues. The Farm Bureau has also been very active in this arena in terms of talking with its members about issues relating to the contracts that are coming out with ag tech providers and issues relating to privacy and the access to the information that they have. And they've worked with a variety of industry players to develop a set of principles in terms of data management and privacy that they are putting forth and talking about very publicly and trying to get manufacturers and other ag tech providers to sign up for these principles in an effort to help kind of address some of the concerns that their members have expressed. And then finally, there are other industry groups out there. One of those is the Open Ag Data Alliance, which was formed by a farmer and a professor at Purdue, along with some seed companies. I think C&H is a member of this group, and their primary focus is more along the lines of portability of the data. Having a platform so that a producer has the ability to move from one ag tech provider to another and be able to transfer the information that goes along with that. And so there's all kinds of groups within your industry that are paying attention to these issues. And one of the goals that we have is that we want to be there. We want to be there learning about this, understanding this, and producing information for dealers so that you too can have a voice and at least an understanding of what's going on in this area. The other thing that's happening right now is that there's been some manufacturer pressure for dealers to start paying attention to this. And I mentioned Deere as an example earlier on. And one of the things I think that Deere realized was that they can spend a lot of money on PR efforts, on producing really strong policies and agreements, but at the end of the day, the dealers, you guys are the last touch point with the customer, and that if you're not paying attention to these issues and you're not prepared to be able to deal with these issues, then that can create some brand issues. And it's kind of like a McDonald's franchisee selling a bad hamburger. The headline isn't Mr. So-and-so sold a bad hamburger at his restaurant. The headline is McDonald's made 20 people sick through food poisoning or something along those lines. And so in the same way, I think the concern is that if you're a John Deere dealer or a Case dealer or what have you, you've got a sign on your store that's associated with a brand. And if there's a problem, there's a concern that would be stuck with the brand, which can impact both the manufacturer and other dealers that also carry that sign and carry that brand. And so, there are some actually understandable reasons why there's concern in this area from the standpoint of the manufacturers, and it relates to the brand implications. So before we, in terms of kind of getting an additional overview in this area, I want to make sure we've got a good understanding of really what we're talking about here in terms of data and what it means for you all. And data is, that's obviously been something that you've been using in your business for years and years. That's nothing new. It's numbers. What I'm really talking about, we're really talking about here today, is really big data. And there's a lot of definitions out there about that. My viewpoint on that, or I think a fairly easy way to understand it, is it's the ability using today's technology to generate large amounts of data and be able to analyze it very quickly and effectively and hopefully improve your decision making as a result of that. And it's that aspect of the breadth of the data that's available out there today that's causing some of the both some of the positive and the negative aspects in the conversation we're hearing with customers. And so obviously when you've got data in your business, you've got customers' data that you may have access to. You're going to have your own personal, your business data, your financial data. You've got employee data that's stored in your business. So you've got data all around your shops. And hopefully you're using that. Hopefully the data is helpful to you in your business from a marketing standpoint or generating new products and services. But the bottom line is everyone's got data that we're going to have to deal with, and it seems to be more and more data is out there, which is driving the conversation about privacy and security. And when you also need to look at, when you get into this area, you've got to understand, who am I really worried about? When I look at the things that I've got to be focused on in my business as it relates to data, who are the constituents? And when you look at the list on your screen, you're going to see just about everybody you deal with. Okay, is going to be involved and have some implications relating to data and privacy. Your customers, we've already talked about them. Manufacturers obviously are developing products and services. They want to get the data so they can develop new products and services and be able to make the data available to the customers. You've got to think about your relationships with third-party vendors. Both the vendors that you hire, maybe somebody that works that helps you out with your IT function that may have access to your data, and then your customers' vendors. If you're working with your customers' vendors like an agronomist or a crop insurer, there may be implications there in terms of your relationship and the data that you're sharing with them. You've also got to think about your relationship with your employees. Your employees have to have access to this data. They're what make your business. They're the people that make your business run. And so, what's your relationship with them? What limitations they have in terms of the use of the data? And finally, you've got to think about your competitors. As information becomes more and more important in terms of how we do in business, how successful we are, competitors obviously have an interest in getting their hands on some of that information, and so you've got to think through those relationships as well. So when you start then to think about what are the types of things as dealers you need to have in place, you've got to have an understanding of what are some of the key issues that are involved in this area. And this next slide really shows you what those issues are, and probably the starting point for a conversation relates to ownership. Who owns the data? And I think by and large, from the standpoint, most farm equipment dealers, I think today, I think generally would tell you that the customer owns the data. And I know there's some nuances in there about whether it's your customer or the landowner or whatever it may be, but the reality is I don't think from a dealer perspective most dealers are trying to claim ownership over data. But I don't think that's the most important question. I think a more important question for you all is the question of who can use the data. Okay, if I don't really care if someone owns it, if I've got the ability to use it in ways that I think may be important for my business. And that's simply a matter of how your contracts and policies read. And so what you want to do is be able to have adequate commitments to your customers, but have the ability to use it for ways that can benefit your business. A third question would be who can sell it. Okay, and this really kind of ties into the type of information that you have. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But that's another question that you need to answer in terms of what I want to have the capabilities to do with this data. Am I just going to use it for analysis, or can I use it for other things that actually can make me money in my business? You've got to think about confidentiality and security. Confidentiality are really your obligations or your promises that you make to your customers about the information that you have about them. Security is really how you go about living up to those promises. What are you going to do? What are you going to do to keep that information confidential? I mentioned earlier types of information. Some concepts that you'll hear about are aggregated data or anonymized data on the one hand, and then personally identifiable data on the other hand. And what I'll tell you is that by and large, the personal stuff, and when personal, I also mean personal business information as well. That's really kind of out of bounds in terms of you being able to disclose that to third parties without permission or sell it, for example. And I think that's a pretty common acceptance among dealers. But when you get to aggregated data or anonymized data, that may be some data where you're adding some value. You're recognizing some information that whether you're combining with other things or what have you, you may actually be able to have the right to use that data and maybe to sell that data in connection with other products or services. That's more inbounds, and the policies we've developed would allow for that. Liability and risk management is another concept that we're going to talk quite a bit about today. With the data that you've got access to and the additional products and services that you're selling, we're seeing some increased exposure among dealers, and so we want to make sure that you guys are taking steps to address that along, not only in your contracts but also from a risk management perspective in terms of understanding what insurance might be out there. And the last thing you've got to be thinking about is government regulation. And the United States has been pretty hands-off in this area. Generally said, look, if you don't, we're not going to tell you have to have a privacy policy, but if you do, we expect you to live up to it. And that's really been pretty much it. But things are changing rapidly, and so one of the things that I want to touch on briefly is the fact that we're in a dynamic environment right now, and regardless of what your manufacturer's saying, regardless of what your customers are saying, you've got some legal issues. The legal landscape is going to change too. It's going to make you, I think, make everyone stand up and have to pay attention to this issue. And so, this is an issue where typically, historically, the European Union and Canada have been much more active in regulating, privacy and the use of information. But in the United States, what's really happening now, as I mentioned earlier, is that there's some consumer consumer concerns in terms of the negative uses of data that's really driving change. And one thing that really caught my eye several months ago was an article in Business Week that talked about a hospital chain that said, hey, we know there's a lot of marketing information out there about people and their buying habits and what they're doing, and it's usually sold to people for advertising purposes. This hospital chain, though, they decided, hey, we can buy that information too, and that may actually give us some unique information about, important information about our customers, our patients. May give us some insights as to some issues they may, maybe some behaviors they're engaging in that put them at risk for certain health issues. And let's get in front of that, maybe contact them about that, see if we can provide some preventative medicine, so to speak, versus reacting on the back end. And that sounds well and good from a business standpoint, but when you stop and think about that, you got to start wondering, how is that data going to be used? And so kind of imagine a conversation that goes along like this. I'm in my office and I get a phone call. Phone call goes something like this. Hi, Mr. Formwalt. Yes, sir. Hi, this is Dr. Thomas. Hi, Dr. Thomas. How are you? Well, I'm doing okay, but I've been checking your data. I'm a little bit concerned. It says here that you had 5 Jack and Cokes at the bar on Saturday night. How are you feeling? Well, now that you mentioned, maybe I do kind of have a little bit of a headache. No, Mr. Formwalt, I'm not worried about that. What I'm really concerned about is this is the 3rd week in a row your data says you've had 5 Jack and Cokes at the bar. And so I think you may have a problem. I sit there and after I hang up angrily, I sit there thinking I was just blowing off steam, and I start wondering, is this really a conversation that could happen with this kind of information that's out there? Is that a conversation that's likely to happen? Probably not. I hope not. But you all have to be realistic about this, which is that every single one of us is a member of a loyalty club in connection with a restaurant or a bar, for example, where we sign up and let them get access to everything that we're buying, from a drink or to an entree, in exchange for getting 10% off or something like that in connection with the next meal that we might buy. And what you need to realize is, in terms of most of those situations, most of those programs, you're allowing that company to sell that data to anybody that they want to. And so whether my conversation that I just shared with you is going to happen or not is one thing, but it's kind of scary out there, is because even though we're business owners, you and I we're all business owners, and generally we don't like to have people tell us what we can or can't do with our information. We're also all consumers, and we also all have our own information. And so when I start thinking through situations like this and how this data can be used, I start thinking that, some regulation in this area probably isn't such a bad thing. And I don't think I'm alone, and I think we're going to see more and more of that coming down the road. And so when you look at what's out there right now in terms of the legal landscape, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but there are 47 states out there that have data breach identification laws. And basically what it means is that if you lose someone's personal information, you've got some obligations to notify people. And these are the kinds of laws that are tripping up the Targets and the Home Depots of the world. And there's situations that lead to a lot of cost. There's estimates out there that when you have these kinds of issues, it's $250 per customer to meet all the compliance costs and things along those lines. It can lead to an investigation by the Attorney General. You've got issues because you've got all these different states have different laws. As dealers, many of you operate locations in multiple states, and so you got to comply with multiple state laws when you have these problems come up. And so it's an area of growing importance where the states are actively involved. And this is one area where I want to make sure you understand what's at stake, which is these laws right now only deal with personal information, and that information truly is like Social Security numbers tied to a person's name, etc. And so when you think about this, I want to make sure you understand. We don't get too worked up about it. The good news is there's some insurance available that can help you out with this kind of an issue. I think Federated and Century both offer the coverage. I want to say it's about maybe $150 a year for $50,000 of coverage. So when you think about that $250 number and the number of customers you have, you might be able to get coverage that's fairly reasonable to help give you some protection in this area. But the good news for you all, when you hear this kind of stuff, I want to make sure you understand the context, is that these laws are really, they're focused on the people that are doing a lot of retail transactions. I don't think dealers are a real target-rich environment for these kind of retail transactions. You can do a lot of volume, but you don't have a high number of customer transactions compared to some of these other retailers. So the good news is I think you're going to have some limited exposure in this area, but it's an area that shows you there's regulation in the pipeline, and the regulation is going to come down the road as well. It's probably going to get more intrusive and kind of start coming in more into the information that we're carrying about our customers. California, the states are starting to get much more active because Congress at a federal level really isn't taking much action nowadays. California and there are other states are starting to kind of nibble around the edges, addressing different interest groups. They're adopting some of the types of legislation that's going on in the European Union, for example, in terms of giving people a right of privacy or a right to be forgotten, have their information come off of the web. Again, these are types of laws that are not impacting the business information that you have from your customers, but this stuff is changing rapidly, and as these regulations get adopted, we're expecting more and more of this to start kind of impeding into the areas where you have more information about your customers. Now, more relevant to you in terms of immediate application is that I mentioned earlier that there's really not a law in the books that says that you have to have a privacy policy. One aspect of that, though, is that for those folks that do have a privacy policy, and more your customers are expecting it, is that the federal government is starting to take a more aggressive role through the FTC in terms of taking action to say that if you have a privacy policy and you have a data security breach, that you can face some liability. And that liability is based on something that's called an unfair or deceptive trade practice. And what they're saying, and this happened in the Wyndham Hotels case, they're saying that, look, if you've enticed customers to give you their information through your privacy policy, which says you'll try to take steps to keep the information secure, and we don't think your program was robust enough, then we're going to say you violated the federal trade practices rule and had an unfair and deceptive trade practice, which can subject you to thousands and millions of dollars of fines. The Wyndham Hotel said, look, the law has never been interpreted to require us to have a particular level of data security, and they fought the FTC in court, and a few months ago they lost. Okay, and so the FTC, the government, is now taking the position that you have to have, if you have a privacy policy, you have to have a data security plan in place, or you're going to run afoul of federal law. And again, this is another example of a change that's come in just the last several months that is really kind of changing the conversation about how we're talking to dealers about this. Because it's making it all the more important as you're being forced to address privacy issues. It's now critical from a legal standpoint that you're also looking at how you're securing that information. So now that you've kind of got the background in terms of what's at stake here, now you got to bring out the lawyers, and they're going to write a bunch of paper, and you're going to be wondering why in the heck why are these documents so long, and what all these words mean, okay? And I'm here to tell you that a lot of this stuff is actually here is a benefit to dealers. It's here to help you try to reduce your liability exposure, in some cases meet some of your manufacturer requirements, and then also to comply with the law. And so what I want to do next is really walk you through just about five or six of the documents, not all the documents, the ones that I think are the most important in the interest of time here, and try to give you a good explanation as to what they mean and how they impact your business. And the first couple documents relate to this issue squarely of privacy and data security. And the first thing is a privacy policy. And all this is a policy. It's not a contract your customer signs, but it's basically your promises to your customer of here's what I'm going to collect, here's how I'm going to secure it, and here's how I'm going to use it. For those of you, which I think impacts a lot of you, those of you that are selling lawn and garden equipment, it may not be the biggest part of your business, but if you are and you're offering any financing in connection with that, and by financing I mean manufacturer financing or third-party financing programs, if you're assisting the customer in getting that financing, there's been a law in the books for the last 15 years called the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act that requires you to have a privacy policy in place. And so there are some legal obligations for most dealers, at least with those customers, to have a privacy policy. Now, when you have a policy, and we know that more and more dealers are adopting these and are being encouraged to adopt these policies, one of the things I want you to be real careful about is how you get yourself in trouble with these policies is you talk too much about them. You want to make sure whatever you say on the policy is consistent. And I sat through a meeting last summer where the president of Monsanto's Climate Corp was talking about the fact that their company's privacy policies, they said, hey, we don't use anyone's information unless they give us permission to. And at the same time, he's pointing to a screen which said that, but then it listed all the different exceptions. We won't do this except. And there were about 10 exceptions that allowed them to do pretty much whatever they wanted to do with the customer's information. Now, I'm not criticizing the policy, but what I want to encourage you to do is don't get caught up in that kind of a game. Keep it simple. Your customers, for those that are asking about this, you've got a good relationship with them for the most part, and what they really want to know, if they're asking about this, they really want to know that you have something that you've kind of thought it through. They don't need to know all the details. So my advice to you is, if you get a customer that asks you about privacy, say, hey, we've got a privacy policy. You can go find it on our website, and leave it at that. And that's going to satisfy virtually everybody that you're dealing with in this area. Policy is because it's not a contract. It's something you can put in place, just as soon as you want to do it. It goes into effect when you post it, generally on your website. And it's something that can be changed. I mean, this is the area that we'll see a lot of change over the years, and you'll be able to react to that and make changes in your policy, and those changes will go into effect as soon as you post them. And I really think it's becoming more and more critical for dealers to address these issues in their dealership, to adopt a privacy policy based on the customer concerns, the manufacturer expectations, and because it's reality that you're going to have to do this as a dealer, you also need to start thinking about, in what ways do I want to use this information? Okay, because if you're telling the customer I'm not going to use it, except you got to be able to have those exceptions ready. And so one of those things I want you to think about is, don't put yourself in too much of a box. Think about how you can use that aggregated data. And I'm not going to pretend to tell you how you might be able to use it down the road, but my guess is that there will be business opportunities that will present themselves that may make this data that you have in your business valuable in some other context. One good example of that was a machinery link. They were leasing combines for years and years, and apparently they had in their leases that they had the ability to capture the data that came from the operations of those combines in the producer fields. And just a year or so ago, they said, we're going to take that information and we're going to create a mapping program that's going to use that data to help us develop micro maps from a yield standpoint of farmers' fields. And I don't know whether the product itself is successful, but it was a real good example of a situation where someone said, I want permission to use your information in an aggregated or anonymous way. And they sat on that information for a number of years until they found a use for it. So I'd encourage you, and our policies, the policy that we have will allow you to do that same kind of a thing. The other thing is that you need to remember when you're looking at it from a privacy policy standpoint is that you're going to be, every dealer is going to sell or merge at some point in time. And so if you've got a privacy policy out there that says, hey, we're not going to transfer your data to anybody, you want to make sure that you've got the ability to transfer that data to someone that buys your business or someone that buys a location. And that's just kind of a piece as there gets more and more of this stuff out there, as the information becomes more and more important to you in the success of your business. You want to make sure you're going to have a clear right to get that information, whoever's buying your business down the road. Along with the privacy policy, the next core document you really need to have in place, and this kind of gets to the federal law issue as mentioned earlier, is a data security program or an information security program. This is not a public document. This is a private document, internal document. It sets out your principles about, hey, here's how we're gonna comply with law. Here's how we're gonna monitor and make sure that we're living up to our promises and keeping our information secure. And so that's the legal aspect. That's the legal paperwork that's involved. But unlike a lot of these other things, this cannot be a check the box deal. Okay, if you just adopt a piece of paper and then you don't do anything about it, you're going to be in worse shape than if you hadn't done anything at all. And so when it comes to data security, the tough part of this thing from a dealer standpoint is you've got to actually do some work, and you got to actually appoint someone in your business that's going to pay attention to this and has some authority to make other people pay attention to it. That may be your CFO, maybe someone that's heading up your IT function, but it's got to be someone that's been given some authority to say, hey, this is important, and you all are going to come along and help me put this program in place, and we're going to design it, we're going to implement it, we're going to live it. And that's a challenge. In addition to that, you've also got to make sure all your employees are aware. If an employee is not aware that it's a problem to be talking about one customer's yield information in front of another customer at the parts counter, then you just have a big hole in your data security program. Okay, so your employees, they need to have a basic understanding as well as to the importance and what you're trying to accomplish. And we're well aware that this is a challenge. And so as part of what we did is we spent some time with we hired a consultant that went out and actually worked with a number of dealers, spent a couple days with each of them, really trying to understand from an operational standpoint what's going on in terms of from the business system standpoint. How are you collecting information? How are you using it? What are your processes in place? And as part of that, we put together a step-by-step implementation guide for dealers to be able to use to actually put in place a data security program. And this is a big document. And the idea is you can't sit down in one fell swoop and get this thing in place. The idea is to break it up week by week. These are some basic steps that we can tackle and make sure that we put in place. And it's a basic how-to guide so that anybody that's got some project management ability in your organization should be able to take this document and implement a data security plan. Along with that, we've also developed some training videos. A training video to help that person understand what's going on, a training video that serves as a general employee training video to help you, come up, deal with your obligation to make sure your employees understand this stuff. And that's about a half-hour video that should help you with that training program function. And again, we're trying to do all of this because we want to put something together that makes this, I'm not going to say it's easy, but makes it actually achievable for a dealer to put in place a data security program. Because one, you've got an obligation to do it, but at the same time, I understand it's damn tough. And what I want to make sure you understand here is that you're going to have to do some work, but it's not something that should cost you tens of thousands of dollars. Okay, it's going to cost you some man hours, but not tens of thousands of dollars. And the other thing I want to make sure that you understand here is that even though you need this program to comply with law, you're not trying to create Fort Knox here. It's got to be a reasonable security program, okay? And so you've got to sit down, though. You're going to have to drill down in the basic aspects of how you deal with data in every part of your business. But whatever you're doing, it's got to be reasonable. It doesn't have to cost you an arm and a leg. You can take some basic steps and comply as long as you sit down and focus on that. And so I think that's something that dealers are really going to find valuable in terms of dealing with this issue or this kind of emerging issue that's impacting your business. So I've already mentioned the legal obligations you have to have in place a data security program. You also have contracts in place with your finance providers and your manufacturers that can require the same thing. And so again, there are multiple ways as to why this is important for you to start paying attention to this area. Not to mention the fact that there's going to be more and more regulation in this area, and so it's just something we're going to have to deal with. It's much better to get in on it now, understand what's going on, and you'll be able to adapt easily to changes that come down the road. Real briefly, I mentioned that some of your finance provider contracts may have some obligations in them. A couple examples for Case and New Holland dealers, C&H Capital Retail Financing Agreement has got a paragraph that says that the dealer shall develop and maintain policies that will safeguard the security, confidentiality, and integrity of your customers' information. For those of you that accept credit cards, which I know is virtually all of you, here's an sample language from GE's credit card program agreement. Almost the same phrasing, that you're going to have appropriate safeguards to protect the security, confidentiality, and integrity of your customers' information. Again, so you've had, these agreements have been in place for years, creating this obligation for you to have some data security programs in place. And even though some of these folks may not be adamant right now about enforcing this, where this comes home is if you do have an issue, it creates a obligation to compensate these people for costs that they incur. And the best example of this is Target recently agreed to pay $18 million in a settlement with the credit card companies based on this language to compensate them for costs they had in issuing new credit cards, credit monitoring expenses, etc. And so this language is important, and it can lead to legal liability, some money liability if you have problems in terms of not complying from a data security standpoint. Now, when you talk about data security, I mean, a lot of times people are thinking about the websites, and hacking the websites, kind of the sexy thing, the thing that gets all the attention. But, it's a little more boring than that. And when you put together a data security program in your business, you've got to focus on the little stuff, the stuff that can happen every day. And so some common things where you may lose data, and so you got to think about how are you going to address and limit the risk of losing data in those situations. Maybe losing a laptop or losing a phone. Our phones have as much information as our computers nowadays. How are you going to handle that situation? What about employee theft? And when I say theft, I also include the situation of where you've got an employee that maybe they've just left, they've left left to take another job, and they take a customer list with them. Guess what? That's theft. And so how are you gonna address those situations from a data security standpoint when you're trying to deal with a situation that occurs hopefully not every day, but pretty frequently when you've got an employees that are changing jobs. Dumpster diving. People, they'll look if you're throwing out paper records and you're not shredding them. People will go through and look at that kind of stuff. You've got to think about your service providers. People that may have access to your data, do they have weaknesses in their systems? Or they have obligations to you to keep your information confidential? Because that's another element of your data security. And finally, look at your basic copy machine. I didn't really pay much attention to this until I started looking into this stuff in more detail, but everybody's got a copy machine in their business, and those copy machines actually have hard drives or computers in the machine that they store an electronic copy of every single document that you've ever copied in that copy machine. So what happens every 2 or 3 years? You end up trading out that copy machine, or the lease is up and you get a new one in, and that copy machine goes out the door, and guess what? So does all your financial statements. They go right out the door too, and they're available to whoever else wants to get into that hard drive. The guy that decided to photocopy his butt on the machine, he should be concerned too, because just guess what? His image is out there too. And so you start thinking about that, and the good news is there's some simple steps you can take. The copy machine manufacturers, they've got instructions out there for how you can wipe the hard drive or eliminate the information that's on there. But you got to actually understand that there's a risk there, and you got to make sure you got a process in place to be able to do that before all that information goes out the door. So this is not rocket science. It's a matter of sitting down and kind of just thinking through where is my data, customer data and my business data. Where's that residing? How can I look at limiting some risk there? The next document that I want to spend some time talking about has got the real exciting headline or title of General Terms and Conditions. And even though it's a boring title, it's actually a really important document that is becoming, I think, critical for dealers to start exploring. The idea is this, is that you guys are all pretty good about managing your risk when it comes to selling iron. When you sell that, you sell it with a manufacturer warranty, so if there's problems, generally the manufacturer is stepping up and taking care of those issues. The product liability laws in our country are pretty good, that if someone gets hurt or there's property damage because of an issue with the equipment, the finger's generally pointed at the manufacturer, and they usually handle those issues, and you're generally kind of removed from that exposure. That same stuff doesn't apply. The same protocol doesn't apply when you're talking about your service work. And I'm talking about your general repair work that you're doing, but also talking about these additional services you're now starting to offer more and more as you're growing your business and getting more into technology, whether it's RTK services, you may have some more sophisticated maintenance plans, you may be looking at, you may got an agronomist on staff, so you're utilizing the data that's available to do some consulting. All of these things are services that you're doing that, to the extent there's a problem out there with the services that you provide, it creates exposure to you and your business. And so we've developed some documentation to help limit your liability in that area. And one of the great examples of that I've seen recently is we had a situation where a dealer had done some repair work on a sprayer, and probably about $2,000 repair job. The problem was the sprayer malfunctioned. It was not applying correctly. Some question as to whether that was the dealer's issue or just another problem with the sprayer. But the bigger problem was that sprayer was owned by a co-op, and the co-op had several of its members that were using the sprayer. And the issue didn't come up until later on, but there was a problem. They figured out, hey, we're not getting the yield we expected. And as a result, they made a claim against the dealer for $500,000 of damages relating to yield loss. Now, I know you guys make pretty good money from doing repair and service work, but man, you think about that, how much margin you got to make on all those repair transactions to make up a $500,000 claim, and that doesn't look so good anymore. And unfortunately, you don't have a lot of those types of claims. We're seeing more and more of those, and the stakes are getting higher based on the technology that's involved and the magnitude of the loss that can occur and the types of customers. Whether it's a co-op or whether it's just a large customer, the damages amounts are going up. And the tough situation in this deal is that the dealer's insurance didn't cover yield loss. And guess what? In a lot of cases, your insurance won't cover yield loss. There are some products that are starting to come out there now. They're being designed as a result of our conversations with some insurers that I think Federated's come out with a product. I think Century also has now, which is starting to address some of these yield loss situations. But it's new coverage, and I'm not sure exactly how much protection it's going to provide in all cases. And so this is a critical issue that you need to start thinking about in terms of your contracts with your customers. And what we found is that virtually all dealers don't really have any terms outside of maybe a late charge or an interest charge, someone doesn't pay on time. There are really no terms with customers when it comes to doing service work or any other kind of or selling software products and services, for example. And so it's a hole that you guys have, and it's something we really need to take a look at and address with the customer. And what we're trying to do it on a one-time basis. We've got a document that's got a lot of legal language in it. And so the question is going to come up is, how am I going to get a customer to sign this stuff to address these liability risks? And I'm going to talk about that in two parts. So the first point is it's going to be a one-time contract. We're going to ask that customer to accept those terms one time, and that'll bind them for all their future transactions they have with you. And I'll address the other issue later on in the presentation. But the primary function of this document is, and the most important thing I think for you to understand, is we're trying to limit your liability. And what I'm proposing that I think is realistic is that you limit your liability to a refund of what you were paid for the service. You know, this is important because there's no manufacturer warranty involved in this stuff. On the software side, there's very little manufacturer warranty. It's not the same as you're dealing with the equipment. On your services, you're generally not. There's no warranty. That's all on you as the dealer that's providing that service. And so it's really important that you look at this concept of trying to limit your liability. And this is something that you get your oil changed. Guess what? They limit their liability to the amount that you paid for the oil change. If you go buy software from Microsoft, their liability is to give you another copy or to give you a refund. They're not going to be on the hook for all the lost profits and damages, which many of you are today, because you don't have the same terms in your contracts with your customers. And so it's really important for you to start thinking about implementing this kind of protection. And it doesn't mean I'm not telling you that don't take care of your customer. Okay, you guys have made a lot of money over the years taking care of customers, and you can still do that. What I'm saying is I want to change the conversation a little bit. I want you to be able to say with confidence, look, you know, our policy is that we give you a refund. I'm going to do this for you. Maybe it's paying them more money. Maybe it's giving some extra attention on some other deal. I don't know what it might be, but it gives you the ability to kind of flip the conversation around and say, look what I'm doing for you, versus an expectation of, hey, you got to make it right and pay me every single last penny of every loss I've ever had. And so really got to start thinking about that, because we're seeing more and more of these claims. The other kicker from the example I just gave you a little while ago was the customers weren't the ones that were coming to the dealer to say we want $500,000. The customers actually had insurance that covered their loss, and so it was their insurance company that was coming after the dealer for the $500,000. And let me tell you this, insurance company is not your friend, and they're coming after you for money. And so you'd be more than happy to have a contract that says your liability is limited to $2,000 instead of $500,000 if you're talking to that insurance company. And so you can understand that too. It's not just a customer relations issue. Sometimes it's dealing with insurers, especially these big dollars. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through some of the other things, but there is a key element of some of this documentation. Also helps you strengthen your collection rights with customers, especially in repair situations. For those that I know you all have experienced that, there are some things that you can do by contract that you may not even be able to do by state law. And so we've kind of taken our experience and tried to put that into play in this terms and conditions to bolster your rights there as well. Real briefly, I mentioned earlier you've got vendors that you're dealing with maybe on a daily basis that have access to your data. And so as you look at your contracts with those folks, you've got to start thinking about, hey, are they agreeing to keep my information confidential, to keep it secure? Are they only going to use it for my benefit? And a lot of contracts may not say that. And so what we've done is we put together a couple of paragraphs that we'd encourage you to put into those contracts, whether it's an amendment or just adopted in the contract while you're negotiating it. We don't want to deal with the entire contract. They're all different stripes and colors. But there are a couple important concepts that you should have covered in those agreements with the folks that have your data. And part of it goes back to living up to your promises to your customers, that you're going to keep them secure. The other thing that I want to touch on relates to your customer's request for you to share data with their vendors, and that relates to their crop insurer primarily, or maybe an agronomist. And we understand from dealers these requests come pretty frequently, and that's fine. And you guys are playing a role to help the customer in terms of transferring that data to those folks. When you get though, if you have a privacy policy, you got to remember you've got to get the customer's permission before you disclose the information to people. And so you do that, you want to make sure you've got a short document that they sign off on, and you also want to limit your risk in that situation. If you're doing this for free, I mean, really all you're doing is you're just pass information. You're not what you don't want to do is you don't want to step into any liability if that agronomist uses the information in the wrong way, or if the information was incorrect. All you're doing is passing the information along. And so we've got a short little document to help you in those situations deal with those issues, and again, tying into your privacy policy and your data security program. The last document that I want to talk about is an employee confidentiality agreement. This is an agreement that you should be using with every single one of your employees. And it doesn't matter whether you use it with employees you currently have on staff or use it with new employees. There's no issues. You need to go out and get an agreement with your folks on this issue. And the bottom line is this, is that they need to have an agreement with you that says, we're only going to use this information for the dealership's benefit, and we're not going to go disclose it to other people. Okay, that's basically what it says. And you want everybody, this is not something you want to just kind of slide by everybody. You want everybody to understand what you're trying to accomplish. It's kind of like that training piece. You're not trying to catch them in a legal issue. What you're trying to do is trying to make sure you don't have a problem. And so it's mostly educational when you ask these people to sign this kind of an agreement. And you can put this in your handbook, your employee handbook, if you want to. But if you do that, make sure you call it out. Make sure you have them specifically sign that page. Again, not from necessarily a legal standpoint, but to make sure they understand that. Because the worst thing you have in the world is if an employee takes the information without even knowing they're doing something wrong. Okay, and so that's the most important part of having this document. And again, this ties into the whole data security and privacy issue. Is if you're telling your customers we're going to take reasonable steps to secure your information, one of the most basic steps you can take is have your employees agree to keep it confidential, and that's what this does. So that's what this agreement does. Everyone should be doing it. Every single employee should have this thing in place. Now, some agreements that they're also part of kind of what we've developed. I'm not going to go into detail, but we've also developed a purchase order form for non-Deere dealers. It's kind of our view on more, I don't know if you call it state of the art, but it really tries to address all the issues we think needs to be in a purchase order, as well as addressing some of the issues relating to the technology and service elements that sometimes appear on a purchase order. For Deere dealers, we've got an addendum to purchase order to cover essentially the same thing, but Deere's got a form that they use with all dealers, so we're doing this through an addendum with Deere dealers. We've got a confidentiality agreement to use with your customer's agronomist, for example, and then we also have an employee agreement, and this goes beyond the confidentiality agreement. This is a non-compete or non-solicitation agreement that you can use to your key management folks. And so just a little bit, there's some other additional documents in there that you would get as part of the program that we've developed too. Now, back to the issue of these terms and conditions and this limited liability. One of the questions we get a lot from dealers is, great, we have all this legal stuff to protect us, but how in the hell am I going to get anybody to sign this thing? Okay, and you don't want your sales guy out there trying to get your customer to agree to sign a 5-page document about limiting your liability. Instead, I want you to start thinking about how you do business every day as a consumer. Okay, I know you all are buying stuff on the internet, and whether that's presents or tools or whatever it might be, you're out there buying stuff. And when you go buy stuff, you're clicking a box, and the box is going to say, I agree. Okay, I agree to what? It's going to either have a link that says terms and conditions over here, or it's going to have a box that's got some bold language you can scroll down. If you actually read the stuff, it'd be about 15 pages of legal crap that would scare your pants off, all right? But the bottom line is you don't look at that stuff. You click the box and you go on and get your present, you get your tools or whatever it might be, and you just take the risk. The language probably isn't good for you, but at the same time, you got an understanding. You're like, look, chances are something's not going to go wrong. If it does, I'll probably get my money back, or I'll get a replacement or whatever it might be, and you move on. So what I want to encourage you to do is start thinking about that same thing in connection with your relationship with your customers. Think about the same way what you're dealing with right now in your financing contracts, right? A lot of your financing transactions are now taking place on screens. It's check a box, click, I agree, I agree, I agree. You and your customer only care about how much, what's the price, what are the payments going to be, what's the interest rate going to be. And you click the boxes and you go along your merry way, you get a deal, your customer's happy. Okay, it's going on in your dealership right now. So how can you take that mindset? How can you apply that to your agreements to get some limitations on liability you think are important in your business to protect you? What we're doing is we're giving you language, giving you a couple sentences that says that you add to your purchase order or to your work ticket that says that I agree that by doing this, by signing this document, this transaction and every other transaction is going to be subject to the terms and conditions that can be found here. And you provide a link to your website. And so when you do that, when you provide that link, all of a sudden, guess what? You've taken about 3 sentences and you've put in place, you've got your customer to agree to a 5-page document that's residing on your website. And the question is that enforceable? And the answer is, by and large, it is, as long as you follow some basic rules. The same way it's enforceable when you click I agree on the internet, this will also work. Now, you've got to make it, it's got to be someplace on your website. They can't have to click through about 10 pages to find it. Okay, so the link needs to go direct. The link can't be 500 letters long. It's got to be something basic. But if you follow those basic parameters, you're going to have pretty good luck making those terms enforceable with respect to your customers. So I'd really encourage you to think about adopting that. Not be afraid of this stuff, because I think there's a way that you can do that in a way that's not going to irritate your customers, but it's going to get you the protections in the same way that other people do with you when you're a consumer. From a contract standpoint, as you start looking, a lot of things we're talking about is agreements. A lot of you guys have multiple locations now, so I encourage you that from a management standpoint, you want to make sure you've got consistent contracts. It's going to help you manage your business. It's going to help from this privacy and data security piece as well. I want you to start thinking about electronic storage and access. I know a lot of you are. This can also help from a data security standpoint. It can be a lot easier, not only to manage your business, it can be a lot easier in terms of turning permission on or off, in terms of who has access to the information if it's electronically stored versus everything being in paper files. And then the last thing I wanted to make sure you're aware of in terms of a process standpoint is that if you do start adopting a policy of where I'm going to have terms and conditions on my website and people are going to accept it someplace else, you've got to start tracking. You got to start tracking the dates that you put in place, the terms and conditions, and the dates that you've made any changes to those terms, and you got to be able to match those up to when the customer signed their agreement with you. Okay, it's not complicated. It's easy to do. It's just a different way of thinking about it than when you're used to having a contract that's got everything on that one page and that customer signs that specific page. It's a little bit different way of thinking. So with that, how do you get these documents? You can go to the website that's on your screen, agradoxhq.com, or you can contact the Western Equipment Dealers Association at the number or the email address that is there, and they'll get you information about the documents. There's also informational description on the website, and there's about a 20% discount for the price for members of the Western Equipment Dealers Association, North American Equipment Dealers Association, or any of the other regional farm equipment dealer associations that are affiliated with NAIDA. And so you can go there and check out more information about these materials. Now, talking about all this fine print, it wouldn't be right if I didn't give you some of my own fine print, okay? And so just to wrap up, some legal disclaimers. What I want to make sure you do is that when you get these documents, you're going to get these things in Word. We're not sending them to you in PDF that you've got limited ability to modify them. You can change them all you want. We think we've addressed pretty much everything that you need and in a way that we think is reasonable and isn't going to really have an negative impact on your customer relationships. But you can make changes. If there are some things that you think need to be done differently, you can do that. Make sure they work for you. If you've got local counsel that you deal with that is familiar with your processes, you may want to have them take a look at this. This is going to really streamline their review. They're not going to develop stuff on their own, but if they need to make changes based on how you might do things and you're unique to your business, go ahead and do that. You need to remember these are U.S. documents that I've been talking about. Now, we've also developed about 7 documents for Canadian dealers as well that are available. But for the U.S. dealers, you've got to remember that if you're dealing with customers in Canada or Europe, you're going to have some additional rules that may apply. And my favorite one here is, hey, this stuff doesn't constitute legal advice. Now, what I mean by that is, look, I've been talking to you about legal concepts here, but what I'm talking about to you, really, what I mean by this is on your individual level, when you're looking at these documents, you need to really make sure that they do work for you. And if you've got questions about them, pick up the phone and call. One of the benefits you get by buying this package through the association is you're going to get access to talk to me or someone from my firm if you've got questions about, what do these documents mean? How do they work together? If you've got a question about the implementation guide, you'll be put in contact with the consultant. And so there's that service element that's included with the price that you pay, so you can get some of those initial questions answered, so you can get up and running with these documents. And so with that, that wraps up the comments I've got, and I just wanted to, I guess, Jack, turn it back over to you to see if there are any questions.
Thanks a lot, Lance. Appreciate it. Excellent presentation. A lot of good information there. And we did have a few questions come in, and if there's any other submissions that folks would like to submit, feel free to do so. But yeah, the first question we had come in here was just wondering if maybe you had some advice. I mean, there are certainly some dealerships, whether it's other OEM or independent guys, that maybe are still taking more of kind of a hands-off approach when it comes to data. But just wondering, what considerations you might have for them for kind of either getting into this or protecting themselves from potential liability.
So you're talking about dealers, or you're talking about OEMs?
Talking about dealers, whether or not they're OEM dealers or just independent, precision ag guys that.
Okay. Yeah. No, I think, everybody, regardless of whether you're getting pressure from an OEM or not, if you've got access to your customers' information, this is something that you've got to be paying attention to. I think it's really focused on I think where it's really focused is really in the area of the ag tech products and services, because of a lot of times that will involve more access to the customer's detailed business information than what you may have had previously with outside of the precision farming aspects of the services you're offering. And so, if you're not in that world, you're not selling a lot of technology. Am I going to tell you you gotta be spending a bunch of time on this? I'm not going to tell you that. I'm a little more practical than that. But if you're dealing with customer data and products and services that are generating that, then I don't really care whose brand you represent or whether you're independent. You're going to have some legal obligations to deal with this. And it's something that every dealer should be focused on. And I think what we're trying to do through these documents is really give you the tools, regardless of the color that you represent or the type of equipment that you're selling. These documents should work to help give you explanations and tools you need to put this stuff in place.
All right. Another question we had come in here: if a farmer is using certain practices on their operation that might be considered proprietary, how can a dealer kind of help protect that intellectual property?
Well, the dealer himself, I guess the question would be whether or not the dealer actually has access to that intellectual property. I think that the thing the dealer probably has to do is they've got to be cautious that they're not releasing that information. If a farmer is claiming proprietary rights in that, then they want to make sure they've got procedures in place to not disclose that information to third parties. And that's probably going to be on a case-by-case basis. In terms of just protecting it itself, that's really the farmer. If they've developed a proprietary method of doing something, then they're going to have to, if it's something that's patentable or something that's from a trade secret standpoint, then they're going to have their own documentation in place that they're going to need to be using with anybody they give access to in that information. I don't know if that helps answer the question. It's really going to, I think from a dealer standpoint, it's really going to depend on what they might have access to, and I don't think they can do much about it other than to prevent, further disclosure.
Sure. And I think we got time for maybe one more here, and we had one come in. You mentioned, obviously this is kind of an evolving, landscape here with the privacy and protections, but just wondering, if maybe you've got a few thoughts for, where this might be evolving in the next few years. Are there things that, dealers should probably keep on their radar in this area?
Yeah, I think I think what I would expect is that I think whether it's going to come from legal changes in the law or it's going to come through the OEMs. I would expect there's going to be a lot more pressure on dealers to really protect the business information from the customers. And I mean, my sense is that I don't see there's going to be too much pressure. Historically, the U.S. hasn't been too much, saying, hey, you've got to have a particular policy in place or a particular set of protocols. But I think what I would see is I would see that the industry and the manufacturers are going to try to get together and try to have a more common set of principles that they're going to adopt in their contracting practices with the customers, and that's going to lead probably to some more standardization with the dealers in terms of the data security practices they adopt. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to actually get a little bit out in front of that by offering a package that in effect would standardize that from a dealership standpoint. As more and more dealers use these documents and practices, they're going to be set up to really have a consistent framework already in place, which helps kind of forestall legal efforts to try to mandate something totally different.
Thank you, Lance. Well, that's all the time we have for today's presentation. Just a reminder to attendees that today's webinar and audio will be made available on the Precision Farming Dealer website. And make sure to stay tuned through our e-newsletter and daily email updates for upcoming speakers and topics in our Precision Webinar series. So on behalf of Lance and the Western Equipment Dealers Association, thank you for joining us today. When you leave the webinar, there'll be a short survey about your experience with today's presentation, and please let us know what you think of the live event and let us know what topics you'd like to see covered in future webinars. Thanks again.